welcome everybody out to the ribbon cutting ceremony for the John Leland Memorial Interpretive sign that the Baptist Heritage Revival Society is dedicating today in the town of Cheshire, Massachusetts. And we're very excited about being able to complete this project. I just want to first say a thank you to the town of Cheshire, all you who are able to be here. You've been very kind and very helpful through the process. Very thankful today also to Pastor Chris to be able to go up to First Baptist Church and be able to see the documents, even the ordination certificate of John Leland. So our experience here has been wonderful. And also before I begin, I want to say thank you to Gary Stinnett, who is here on the camera, and also Pastor Aaron Rogerson of Missouri, who's also here on the camera. And these men were instrumental. Pastor Rogerson flew in and Gary drove in from North Carolina to give their services and their time to be able to be a blessing. And so this is important to us. And I want to bring you to something real quickly, read a verse of scripture from the Bible. And the reason I do this is because John Leland was so instrumental and important because he was a man who not only understood principles of civil government and understood liberty of conscience like no other in his generation, but he was used of God to teach that to so many. Our founding fathers learned a whole lot about the difference between toleration and religious liberty, true liberty of conscience, from John Leland. 45 Baptist ministers sat in prison in Virginia prior to the Revolution because they preached the gospel contrary to the state church. And so that struggle culminated in our receiving the First Amendment. But you know, the question that is often asked is, how did we get liberty? And we're living in a generation that really doesn't understand how we got liberty. Well, first of all, liberty is the doctrine of God. And I'm reading here from Leviticus chapter 25 and verse 10, where the Bible says, "And ye shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof." Now, what's interesting about liberty, the Baptists have always understood this, is if it's not liberty for all, then it's not liberty at all. And therefore, as you study the annals of church history and religious history, you'll find that the Baptists never persecuted anyone. They didn't believe in persecuting others. They believed and desired in a society where the gospel could be freely preached and also freely rejected, because in that kind of society where there's liberty of conscience and a person has the ability to reject the gospel, then and only then can we know that if they've received it of their own volition. The Baptists understood that. So John Leland, of course, is a Massachusetts native, and he found himself in Virginia, felt like God had called him to go to Virginia to fight the church state and to establish religious liberty. Amazing story. He felt that God had hand-selected him for that. Well, he got to Virginia, and of course, a great struggle was going on for religious liberty. And he began, of course, to preach first, traveled all over Virginia. In fact, in his book, he recorded in his journals that he traveled 75,000 miles on horseback in itinerant evangelism throughout Virginia. You say, is that true? Did he really do that? I'm not sure he did or not, but I should say that's amazing. I know this, he went across the state first preaching the gospel, and then he went across the state teaching people about the principles of civil government and liberty of conscience. To make a long story short, if that's possible at this point, we understand that after the Revolution, a new constitution was being drafted and written, of course, by James Madison. And that constitution was being circulated throughout the several colonies in lieu of their either accepting it or rejecting and ratifying that constitution. Well, the problem was in Virginia, the Baptists didn't like the Constitution. And you say, why didn't they like the Constitution? Well, it wasn't what was in the Constitution necessarily that bothered them, but it was what was conspicuously missing. There was no guarantee of religious liberty to every individual of this country in the Constitution. In fact, the only thing that was mentioned in reference to religion was that you could not have a religious test to hold public office for federal government. And so the Baptists were very dismayed about that. The reason was they felt as though the revolution would have largely been fought and won in vain if they did not now establish this new nation on the principles of liberty, where everyone could have their own churches and everyone could worship, not just the Anglican Church, not just the pure Congregationalist churches, but the Baptists as well as the Quakers and everyone else. And so it was at that time that Madison began to travel. And as he was traveling through New York and down through Maryland and back into Virginia, he received a series of letters. And in those letters, he became alarmed as he realized Virginia was not going to ratify. And the reason was because Leland had now traveled across the state and had told those people down there, do not ratify the Constitution. We're not going to put delegates in to ratify. unless they change it and alter it and give us liberty of conscience, because they're the ones, in fact, we know of no other religion of anyone that sat in jail in Virginia except for the Baptists. So they were the ones that took the brunt of the beatings and the tarrings and featherings, so they had a lot at stake there. And so what basically happened was a friend of Leland's, who was a minister who had actually suffered at the hands of the state church, his own father had written to Madison and told him there's trouble in Orange and Virginia's not going to ratify. And so he was told, you need to go by the home of John Leland. And all this is fully documented. The writings of L.H. Butterfield, who was a brilliant architect of the writings and compiling the papers of men like Sam Adams and John Adams in Virginia, was ordained by the state to do such things, as the Leland biographer, and he records a lot of this for us. Some of the evidence is actually in the Madison papers in the Library of Congress. But Madison went by to talk to Leland. Leland happened to be out praying in an oak flat, and Madison had already received his objections to the Constitution. Leland thought he had an ace in the hole, and he was really going to jump Madison when he came by to talk to him. But then he discovered Madison had an answer to every one of his objections except for one. And that was the one concerning liberty of conscience. Well, through a discussion that they had, a significant meeting took place, and they decided that the important thing to do was to ratify the Constitution as it stood, in lieu of James Madison promising the Baptists that he would then, if they would vote him into the new Congress of the United States of America, he would stand on the floor of Congress and present what we know to be today our Bill of Rights. And the first one of them tells us that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And that is exactly what the Baptists had longed for. There's a great movie, it's called Magnificent Heritage. It was made back in 1950, I believe, by the Southern Baptist Convention. What's interesting about that movie is it depicts in the very end Madison standing up to begin to read off his Bill of Rights, and he looks over in the audience, and there are all the Baptists, true to history, who were there that day, Leland included, to hold his feet to the fire and make sure. And he looks over, and Leland smiles and nods his head, and he continues. And I'm sure it was something like that. And so this is an amazing thing that happened. Most people today don't realize where liberty came from. Well, this was a doctrine the Baptists have believed down through the ages. And of course, Rhode Island became the Baptist colony. John Clark made it the freest city-state in the known world because it was established with that Rhode Island charter that John Clark, the Baptist minister, had written. They had full religious liberty there. And then, of course, the struggle in Virginia. It just shows the contributions of the Baptists for religious liberty here in America. I wanted to read something just real brief. This is the writings of the elder John Leland, edited by L.F. Green. And there's just in a nutshell, tells us what Leland believed about liberty of conscience. And on page number 40, let me see where I'm at here, 477, he said, "Who is to be judge, whether a man believes truth or error, or whether he exercises that no wise affect the civil compact, or right or wrong? The decision belongs not to the body politic, for neither legislators, judges, nor jurors in their official capacities have anything to do with consciences, souls, or eternity." He went on to say, "It is the glory of the United States that after Christian tyranny had raged with savage fury for 1,500 years, its progress should be arrested in this land of liberty. Rhode Island, New York, and Pennsylvania produce the first fruits of delight that abound in a state where persons property and equal rights are protected by law, and Christianity left in the hands of its author, that's God, and conscience free in the hearts of each possessor." His idea of liberty of conscience was that man should not be controlled, his thoughts should not be dictated or manipulated by law, by human law, either in time, place, or manner. And that's what he believed, and that's what he preached and taught. And our founding fathers learned a lot from him. Sadly, he's been erased from our history to a large degree. But here in the wonderful town of Cheshire, you people are still interested in your history. And so we're delighted to be able to present this to you. And we've been thanked so many times, but the truth is it's our privilege to be able to do something like this. And the idea for us is we hope that future generations will be attached to their roots and understand that there was a price paid for our liberty, and we shouldn't so easily let it slip away and let it be cast aside. That's what makes America the unique, wonderful nation that it is. And so it's with that I would like to, if I could, Pastor Chris, if you can come forward, please tell me your name again, because I have a hard time pronouncing
Adorno.
it. Adorno. Adorno, okay.
Yes.
It sounds like a guy that's ready to sell a pizza or something.
I am. I'm ready to sell pizza right now.
I have Italian roots. And then Mrs. Francisconi, if you could step forward too, and she is she's the chairwoman of the Board of Select People, is what I'll call it here in Cheshire. And if I could just ask you to cut it, and then if you would just pull it off, that would be wonderful. If we could do that. Yes. Amen.
Amen.
Well, I really appreciate you folks coming out today, and I know you didn't come for a sermon, so I won't give you one right now, okay? But I do hope that you'll share this with people, that it is here, and so that others can come down. We've done the best we can to make it as accurate as we can, and hopefully it will last long for you. And we will come through from time to time, because one of the things we do is try to maintain sites as well. So if anything would happen to this, we'd like to be notified so that we can make sure that this stays good for a long time. So thank you all for coming. Let's do this. Pastor, I'm not sure what your name is. Tell me again.
Doug Niner.
Niner. Okay, I wanted to say Streeter, but that's not it. Would you mind lifting up your voice and just saying a word of prayer to dedicate this?